And I really do wish my father all the best. I really, really do. But there is no place for him in my life. And I'm not sorry that I made that decision. I have no regrets about it. And that's when, when we always say we're trying to break generational traumas, generational curses, this wouldn't necessarily be considered a generational curse, but this is a generational trauma. And that's why I'm such a big advocate for really dealing with our issues and getting to the root of them and going back really, really far as we possibly can, just to understand where our families come from, what we were born into, what our parents were born into, so that we understand where we need to start. For instance, research shows that children who grow up without a present father are more likely to drop out of school, spend time in jail, and develop behavioral health concerns. Additional research suggests that having an absent father during childhood can negatively affect children's social, emotional development, particularly by increasing aggressive or attention-seeking behaviors. Hi community, welcome back to acupfulll. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate you being here. So, this week's episode is one that has been a long time coming. I just wanted to be ready to talk about this because when I had initially thought about this topic a few months ago, I knew that I wasn't ready. Actually, towards the end of last year and then a little bit into the beginning of this year, I knew that I was not ready to talk about it and that I wouldn't be able to articulate the topic the way I want to. So I just feel like I'm ready now. I'm in a place where I can speak objectively and where I've come so far in terms of healing. So I'm not going to be emotional about it. Like I said, I'm going to be able to be objective. As per the title of the episode, this week we are going to be talking about the father wound, aka daddy issues. So, if you have been listening to this podcast for a minute now, for long enough, you would have heard me speak about my relationship with my dad in bits and pieces. And until now, like I said, I wasn't ready to really go into the topic. And a big part of me was also quite ashamed. For a long time, I was very ashamed that I just didn't have the dad that a lot of my peers had, friends that I've had in the past, even acquaintances or just people that I'd be meeting for the first time, or that I'd be around now and again, and how they would talk about their dads. That just wasn't my experience. And for a very long time, there was a shame that I carried. And I really, really did not want to talk about my own personal realities and my own personal experiences. And just thinking about it was really heartbreaking for me. So it's not something that I wanted to share with anyone. If anything, I would have rather pretended that my father is someone that he isn't. Mostly to make myself feel better, but also just so that other people wouldn't really see that part of me. So, yes, I struggled with shame for a long time. And I didn't know why I was feeling this way. And I didn't know how to get rid of that overwhelming feeling of shame and guilt and even loss to a certain extent. So yes, I'm only just over the last, I want to say 9 months, maybe 10 months, I've really just come into a place of peace and understanding that my dad is my father, and I've also definitely forgiven him. And that's why I said that this episode, I'm ready to do this episode. I'm ready to speak on this because I have forgiven my father, and I've really worked through all of those feelings of shame and guilt and even anger as well, especially directed towards him, and resentment as well. I used to have a lot of resentment towards him. But I've really come to a place where I've forgiven him, and I no longer carry around this shame, this pain that I used to carry around. And it's obviously taken a long time. It wasn't easy for me to get to this place, but I have gotten to this place. And if anything, especially because I understand what the long-term effects of having daddy issues are and what they could potentially be after my own experiences, if anything, I want anyone who listens to this podcast and is dealing with their own issues with their dad, whether big or small, to really be intentional about working through them. And in my case, being intentional about working through something, being intentional about working through the father wound that I had, did not mean that I came back into relationship with my dad. No, I forgave him, and I have moved on with my life. I do not have a relationship with him, and I do not wish to have a relationship with him. And that is a decision that I took for my own mental well-being, for my own just moving forward and peace in my life. It was something that I needed to do for myself. Wasn't influenced by anyone. This was just something that I came to on my own. And I realized that if I don't make that decision, then I'm just going to keep setting myself back, my growth, my healing, my overall peace. So just context very briefly, because I don't want to make this episode about my life story. I've done some research, and that's really what I want to share, but obviously chipping in here and there and just being able to say this was my experience and this is how I dealt with it. So I was born and raised in a home with both parents, but my father was emotionally absent, and there were just so many other things that he wasn't doing as my parent. There were various other roles that he was not playing, and that affected me very badly, emotionally and mentally. And in my adulthood, that absence from on my father's part really, really affected me. And I ended up making some bad choices. I ended up going down a few roads that I wasn't supposed to. And it made sense when I eventually understood, especially in therapy, that the reason why I was self-soothing in the unhealthy ways that I was, the reason why I was getting into specific kind of relationships, was because of this issue that I had with my father. So yes, I had a dad. He was there physically, but he was absent emotionally, and he was most certainly not a nurturer. He was not somebody who was supporting me in the ways that I needed as a child. And so obviously that manifested in very negative ways for me in adulthood. Hence, some of the things that I've spoken about on the podcast, where that all came from. And it will also make a lot of sense when I talk about the research that I've found. So anyways, yeah, my dad was there, but he wasn't. It affected me negatively. And then, yeah, there were just so many things that I can remember, even from my preteen years into my teenage years, and then into my early 20 years, young adulthood years, that were clearly a result of the absence of a strong, good, kind, loving father figure. And again, I will get into that. So that's really pretty much just my story in terms of that. I'm not going to talk about it too much because, like I said, There's just some really important information that I want to share, and I don't want to take time away from that. But if anything, the biggest thing that has come out of all of the pain and the suffering is me deciding that I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to be in pain anymore. I don't want to suffer anymore. And so I had to, for a very long time, work through some of these very deep sores, these aching pains that came as a result of my father not playing an active role in my life throughout my life. And I've come to a point where I've forgiven him. But forgiving him was for me. It wasn't so that we could mend our relationship. I did try though, but he just was not interested in doing that. And at first, of course, it hurt me because, again, I felt rejected. I felt unwanted specifically by him. And it would just always bring up so much pain for me until I decided that, you know what, this is too much. It hurts too much and it's affecting my life negatively. I forgive him. I understand that he went through his own things, which informed his parenting style, which informed how he showed up for me as a child. But he's not willing to do the work. I am. And because of that, I don't want him in my life. And so that was the conscious decision that I made. That is still my father. That is not somebody that I wish any harm. He is not somebody that is a stranger to me. That is my blood. But I'm the most important person in my life, especially right now. I'm not a mom yet. I'm not a wife yet. I am the person that comes first. My feelings, my healing, my well-being will always come first. My peace will always come first. And as much as I've forgiven my dad, as much as I do not wish him any harm, as much as it might sound crazy to somebody else, I will still show him respect. When I run into him, I will greet him, and I will not be rude or mean. I'm going to be respectful, especially because I see him as a human being before anything else, before him being my dad, before him being the person that did not play an active role in my life. He's a human being. So I'm not going to mistreat him. I'm not going to wish harm upon him. I still do respect him. I just do not have space for him in my life. He doesn't have space in my life. So that's that. I've forgiven him and I've moved on with my life. And I do not want him in my life. And guys, it was very difficult to get to this point. It was extremely hard. I did not ever think that I would be able to sit anywhere with anyone, let alone on a podcast that is public, that can be heard by anyone, people that I don't know like that. Because honestly speaking, as much as I consider everybody that chooses to come and listen to this podcast as a member of this community, and you are a member of this community by virtue of wanting to grow and thrive and challenge your own thoughts, challenge your mind, unlearn certain things, relearn new things. We are still strangers at the end of the day. So I just would have never imagined that I would come onto a public platform and feel comfortable to talk about this, but I do. And I'm very happy that I'm in this place. I'm very happy that I'm no longer angry and holding on to the anger and pain and reaffirming it and repeating patterns that are informed by that anger. So yeah, I'm in a far much better place, and I'm so happy that I've gotten here. And I really do wish my father all the best. I really, really do. But there is no place for him in my life. And I'm not sorry that I made that decision. I have no regrets about it. Most importantly, I also, as somebody who is Christian, I spoke to the Lord about this and spoke about it at length, and I was content when answer that I got from God when it came to this whole conversation, or this whole topic, because I had a lot of back and forth. This is my dad, this is my blood, I am here because of he played a contributing role. He was there for me in certain times, certain moments. He raised me and all of that stuff. But yeah, I'm here. I reached my decision and I'm happy that I made the decision. So in today's episode, I really just wanted to get into what it looks like from a psychological perspective, what it looks like, and how a father wound or daddy issues can play out in a person's life. So growing up, children rely on their parents to keep them safe. Fathers stereotypically are considered to be their family's providers and protectors. So we all know that typically it's always been like that. Even when you look at gender roles, the mom is more of the nurturer, the dad is the provider, he's the protector. And obviously provision and protecting in 2024 is not provision. It's not the same as provision and protection in 1950. It's not just about a man making sure that he provides food, money, pays the bills, and makes sure that his family is protected against anyone that wants to harm them physically. But being a provider and a protector for men means being emotionally present, mentally, spiritually, being a nurturer as well to a certain extent. Obviously, men won't be able to nurture the way women do, but men still have a role to play in that regard. So the tables have obviously turned and so much has changed. But in 2024, when we talk about a man being a protector and a provider, we're talking about somebody who wants to actively love his kids, do better by them, be supportive, be gentle, be kind, be stern, but also be loving, and be able to be stern and loving at the same time. So, yeah, science says it, research says it, the psychologists say it. What happens if your father was disengaged or unavailable during childhood? So, for some people, this can lead to a type of trauma called the father wound, sometimes referred to colloquially as daddy issues. The father wound refers to a household in which a father is emotionally or physically absent, or if the father is in the home, they are highly critical of their children and may be physically or emotionally abusive. This is what Kathleen Douglas says. She's a primary therapist with Charlie Health. So, like I mentioned, my own father was present physically, but he was absent emotionally, and he was also quite manipulative. He was quite harsh with his words, so that's something that we would consider as emotional abuse. And this is something that I grew up in. This is all that I knew. This is exactly what happens when you end up with a father wound because of long periods of being exposed to these unhealthy patterns. Sometimes for some people they experience financial abuse. So they might have had their father in the household, but he was not supporting them financially. He would not share his salary with the family, and they would suffer even though he would be present. For some people it's emotional, it's physical, it is mental. So I think we've figured out what happens, what causes the father wound. What else is the truth is that for some young people, some children not living with their father or having access to a positive male role model can contribute significantly to the father wound. Other causes of the father wound include abuse, neglect, and having a strained or dysfunctional relationship with your father. The father wound can also be based on intergenerational trauma, defined as consistent and persistent years of traumatic challenges within families across generations. And that's when we always say we're trying to break generational traumas, generational curses, this wouldn't necessarily be considered a generational curse, but this is a generational trauma. And that's why I'm such a big advocate for really dealing with our issues and getting to the root of them and going back really, really far as we possibly can, just to understand where our families come from, what we were born into, what our parents were born into, so that we understand where we need to start. And that's something that the book that I read on trauma, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, that's something that book was really focusing on. Understanding the effects of intergenerational trauma and how that can have far-reaching effects for generations, 5 generations ahead, 6 generations, 10 generations ahead. So we have to go back. We have to get to the root of things so that we're able to properly treat them and use the right methods. And if not treated, mother and father wounds are often passed down from one generation to the next. So, what are some of the signs and symptoms of the father wound? Father wounds typically begin during childhood, but the consequences can continue into adolescence and adulthood if left unaddressed. For instance, research shows that children who grow up without a present father are more likely to drop out of school, spend time in jail, and develop behavioral health concerns. Additional research suggests that having an absent father during childhood can negatively affect children's social, emotional development, particularly by increasing aggressive or attention-seeking behaviors. The same study suggests that an absent father can increase risky behaviors among adolescents and contribute to mental health concerns in adults. So the risky behaviors is something that I can relate to. I remember in my earlier 20s, I was in just such a really, really dark place. And again, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about how for long, even after I got out of that, I want to say that phase, or I started healing and I would just look back on some of my behaviors, I was so ashamed because I couldn't understand why I would behave that way, why I would put myself in harm's way in that way. But then it started making sense when I started getting help. I was going to therapy and I was doing the exercises that the therapist was giving me, and I was just being very consistent and intentional about the healing. And obviously the dynamic in my household, when it started changing as well and my dad moved out and my family, we became more and more intentional about healing together as a family after having experienced the things that we experienced. Then it started to make sense why I was behaving the way that I was behaving, and I started understanding that by shaming myself, I'm not giving myself space to continue growing, and I'm also not being gentle the way that I need to be gentle on myself, and I'm just not giving myself grace. You know, I was somebody that when I started having these behavioral issues, it was in my earlier 20s. I would drink so much that I was just getting so drunk all the time. I was just very irresponsible, reckless. I would sometimes take my grocery monies and buy alcohol with it, or go party with it, or just buy things that I wouldn't need or that were not that urgent. And that was not healthy. I remember it just used to be a thing that, oh, you're a student, you're going to be irresponsible, you're going to do silly things, you're also quite young. And it's fine if you do a thing once. It's not fine, but don't do it. Don't take your grocery money and go and party with it, or buy junk food, or just buy clothes when you don't need to do that. But when you are in a place or a space where you are not living at home and you are exploring and experiencing this freedom for the first time, of course you're going to do silly things. But what happens with somebody who is just going through a growth spurt is that it will happen once and then they'll learn from it. I was doing this over and over again. I was also surrounding myself with some really bad company. I can't tell you how many times I got into a car with a drunk driver. It is only by God's grace, and I always say that I am alive and that I am not paralyzed, because that is reckless behavior. That is having a behavioral issue. That is not just being irresponsible. That's having a death wish. It's just dangerous to get into a car with somebody who is drunk, who is under the influence. So I developed my behavioral issues, as this says, as the research suggests. I developed that in my earlier 20s, varsity days, when I was not living at home and I was not around my mom or even my dad for them to see that. When I was in varsity, at the beginning anyways, my parents were still together. They separated afterwards. So I really just went off the rails. It was just very one reckless choice after the other. But once I started getting help, it started to make sense where all of this was coming from. And something else is that for very long, I was just the most put together person. But I also look back now and I realize that I was put together because, like I said, my dad was quite emotionally abusive, and he was also a very aggressive person. And he would use raising his voice, shouting to assert his dominance. And so I just never ever wanted to experience that side of him. So I was always Miss Goody Two Shoes. In high school, people used to call me Miss Goody Two Shoes. But what they didn't know was it was sort of the way I had become socialized or engineered because of my father's behavior and his abuse. So I'd just behave myself and I'd be Miss Goody Two Shoes. And then I left home and I had my own freedom and no one was seeing me anymore and no one could tell me otherwise. I wouldn't have to deal with my dad shouting, and then the behavioral issues, they started. I just kind of went off the rails completely. So I found research, well, what I've been reading is all research, but this speaks on what father wounds in childhood looks like. And the first one is never feeling like you had your father's attention or approval. Feeling like your father disapproved of your choices, feelings, and behaviors. I definitely experienced that a lot as well. Just didn't have much room to express my true feelings. If it wasn't a feeling that my dad liked, then he would either manipulate me into apologizing to him, even if he was wrong, even if he made me feel, even if he was the one that was wrong and he's the reason why I was feeling the way I was feeling, whatever feeling I was feeling, he'd always manipulate or gaslight or scream and shout if I was trying to be expressive of my feelings. So there wasn't really room for me to express my feelings. And after it happened a couple of times, I think maybe preteen years, when I started to really grasp what's happening here, then I just didn't again. I would always suppress my feelings. I wouldn't express myself. The people pleasing really started there, just wanting to make my dad happy all the time. So I definitely experienced that. The other one is lack of affection or security from your father. That's something else. Didn't have a very affectionate father. So, and didn't have there wasn't security from him either. So that's definitely something that I experienced. Feeling scared of your father. I was definitely scared of my dad. Fear of abandonment. Definitely 100% afraid of abandonment. And he would just do it over and over and over again. Having a father who was physically or emotionally absent. I've mentioned this already. Having a father who was overly critical and controlling. And to a certain extent, my dad, he was controlling. He wanted to control my feelings and how I expressed them. And if he didn't like what I was feeling, or if he didn't like that I wanted to express myself, he would shut me down or he'd push me away. Something else that I remember that I also ended up doing, because obviously I didn't know better, so I wouldn't have done better, is that whenever my dad would be upset with me, whenever he didn't like something that I do, he would give me the silent treatment. He would give me the cold shoulder. And I would then go on to repeat that in other relationships. I would either keep quiet and not share my true feelings, or I would keep quiet and punish. It would be a form of punishment towards the person who did whatever they did to me, because that's what my dad would do. So I was repeating it, and that's why, again, dealing with traumas is so important so that you do not repeat what was done to you, what was taught to you, so that you do not take that into other relationships. It's really, really important, guys. I cannot stress enough how being intentional about healing, being intentional about understanding what happened to you, very important question to ask yourself. Not what's wrong with you, even other people, but ask what happened to you so that you can find the right measures to deal with whatever pain or difficulties that you have had to carry around, that you have had to experience. So those were father wound. That was the father wound, how it shows up, or what it could look like, what the is in childhood. And now they took it father wound in adulthood. So in contrast, in adulthood, it would be low self-esteem, confidence, and self-worth issues. I can speak extensively on this. I could really go on and on about my experiences with having a low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and self-worth. I started struggling with this as a teenager, and it went on until my mid-20s. I'm just about to turn 29 in 3 months, and about 3 months, yeah, exactly 3 months. I was about to say 3 months and about a week, but I'm thinking about it, I'm like, it's probably 3 months and a couple of days. Anyways, I'm starting to really be happy with who I am, loving myself, standing up for myself properly now. For all of these years, I was just dealing with wanting to people please and repeating the things that I was seeing growing up in my home, what was modeled to me, and just struggling with knowing who I am and liking myself and appreciating myself and really wanting to be liked and appreciated by other people. But it was because there was this deep wound, this gaping, aching wound, a void that was never ever going to be filled by anything else or anyone else other than me really dealing with what has been going on inside of me and my experiences. Difficulty building and maintaining healthy relationships. 100%. Relationships for me were always havoc. I would always want to turn red flags into, I'd always want to turn red flags into green flags, or I'd ignore them, or I'd find ways to explain them. I would get together with people, whether friendship or romantic encounters, because of the potential that I would be seeing. And I wouldn't want to see a person for what they are. Sometimes it was that I was hoping that I could fix a person or I could help a person reach their full potential. But that's not healthy. That isn't healthy. Difficulty regulating emotions, absolutely. Very briefly want to talk about the central nervous system. That's something that I learned in the book, What Happened to You. The central nervous system, when it is sensitized, when it is overly sensitized, you will not be able to regulate your emotions. There is a part in the brain where in the cortex, our information, a lot of the information is stored, your memories, the good ones, the bad ones, lots of other things are stored in the cortex. And then we have the bottom of the brain, the stem of the brain, that is that controls our body heat, the functioning of our body, like, your movements and all of that stuff. And when you are not able to regulate your emotions, or when your central nervous system is sensitized, your brain cannot reach the cortex to communicate with your body, with the rest of your brain, to just say, we're fine, we're safe, you can calm down. So when you are upset or when something triggers you, you are more likely to struggle to regulate your emotions because your brain is stuck at the bottom and it cannot get the information from the cortex. I'm probably not explaining it properly. I know that somebody who works within the field would be able to explain it better. Psychologists, even Google. So do that, Google. Or you can also alternatively look into purchasing the What Happened to You book that I'm talking about. I will definitely link that in the show notes. That book has been a game changer. That book has been life-changing, honestly speaking. It has helped me understand so much about how the brain works, how the central nervous system works, and what is the reason why some people cannot regulate their emotions. And also, it's never a good idea, just to throw in there, to tell someone who is agitated or triggered or angry or frustrated or is having a panic attack, or who is losing their temper, to relax, to calm down, because this is a chemical thing happening in their brain. This is something that is happening in their body, and you saying words like calm down or slow down will not change the process that is happening. It is a system that needs to be retaught or re-engineered in a way that is healthier, where it will be able to function properly, where you will be able to regulate your emotions, where you will be able to handle triggers better. And that's why there are things such as exercises to help relax, to help heal the central nervous system. I'm also going to link that in the show notes. I've done them, they have worked, they are very, very helpful. It's very possible to, I'm trying to remember the word, but you can teach your brain by repetitively doing something to go back to being, or to go into a more healthier form, into a more healthier shape. The next one is self-sabotaging behaviors. Oh yes, that's something 100% that I've also had first-hand experience with. Fear of rejection, betrayal, or abandonment. Woo! The fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment was so real for me. And because of I was so terrified of being abandoned, one of the few reasons of the reasons why I was staying in relationships that weren't healthy was because I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to, terrified of feeling rejected, terrified of feeling abandoned. Another one that came up was difficulty parenting one's own children. I have not had first-hand experience with this one because I'm not a parent yet, but I do hope that all of the work that I have continued to do will make a difference, and I'm going to completely change the course of parenting for my own kids. I know that I will. 100% I'm confident that I will. Being overly loose or rigid with boundaries. This was me, otherwise known as people pleasing. I was a people pleaser for a very, very long time. I'm always saying that I'm a recovering people pleaser. I said the last time I spoke about this in an episode that I can see the lights. They're looking bright. They're so bright. I'm so happy with myself. I've gone from saying no with an explanation to saying no. That's it. Not feeling the need to explain myself anymore. If I want to give an explanation, I will. If I feel like it's necessary, I will. But otherwise, there's this freedom that I'm experiencing now. There's this freedom that I feel like I've given myself from being strict and having more boundaries and putting myself first in that sense. I am not saying that I've become selfish and greedy and that nobody else matters other than myself. No, I have lovely, lovely people in my life, beautiful people that I want to share with love, pour into the way that they pour into me. But I have boundaries. If I do not have the capacity to show up for you, then I'm not going to. If I do not want to do something, then I'm not going to do it. If I cannot afford to go on a trip or go to a dinner or go to a lunch, I'm going to be straight up with you and tell you that I cannot afford it. Or I'll just say to you, I don't have the capacity, I don't have the space. So it's so freeing. And I recommend that anyone who struggles with people pleasing to really work on it and to release yourself from that prison, because it is jail. It is serious jail. Therapy has helped me saying no, practicing saying no, just saying no when it comes to, just when I feel like I'm not wanting to do a thing. That's where it starts really. And even though at first you will feel guilty because it's not normal for you, even though at first it will be uncomfortable, the more you say it, when you can feel that you don't have the capacity to do something, you don't want to do something, the easier it's going to get. Lastly is mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, or addiction issues. I can relate to the addiction issues because I was drinking so much. I was drinking so much at some point. I was smoking heavily so much at some point. I was just engaged in very addictive behaviors. I was eating food. It was seriously bad at some point or another. I look back on those patterns. I don't feel shame anymore because it was an opportunity for me to learn, which I did. I grew from that. I healed from that. There's so much peace in that. And I know that when I share it with somebody else who might be struggling through it, I am going to, or I am encouraging somebody else to look inside themselves and to question whether this is healthy, whether this is good for them. And you know what, guys? I know that addiction, the word addiction, and acknowledging that you have an addiction to something, it can be shameful, it can be scary to experience in a moment where you're like realizing, whoa, I'm actually addicted to weed, I'm addicted to habli, I am addicted to sex, I'm addicted to alcohol, I'm addicted to people pleasing. In a moment, it can feel very shameful, you could feel overwhelmed, it can be scary. But I promise you that when you put your best foot forward every single day and in the little ways continue to be intentional about working through that, it's going to amount to something incredible. It really, really will. It's going to amount to something incredible. I've spoken about my sobriety journey in an episode. If you go back a few episodes, you will see that I have an episode up on that. And I speak openly and candidly about how I struggled with alcohol becoming my best friend, weed at some point being something that I was using to self-soothe, smoking happily being something that I was using to self-soothe, partying being something that I was using to self-soothe, and that eventually I realized that these are not sustainable ways to self-soothe. This is not healthy, and also that there's something wrong. There's something sitting at the root of it. And so I needed to do something about it. I had to do something about it. It was otherwise going to destroy my life. So yeah, what's beautiful is, and I can speak on it, is that God and how he stepped into my life and healed me is something I'll forever be grateful for. But it shows that no one is ever too far gone. You might think that you're so far gone, but no one is ever too far gone. People that have been on the heaviest of drugs, cocaine, crystal meth, they have come back from that. Some have been 20 years clean. Some have been 40 years clean. So you're never too far gone. And don't let that shame hold you back from moving forward. So I just wanted to also include something else that I found that speaks about what the father wound in daughters looks like, especially because a lot of us here are women. I have a number of men that listen to the podcast. The numbers have increased. If you are a man listening to this, lovely. Lovely to have you here, my brother. A lot of us, though, are women here, so I really wanted to speak about that. Daughters who experience a father wound are most likely going to grow up feeling like they're not good enough. As a result, they may struggle with low self-esteem and a lack of confidence, as mentioned in the previous point I was making about what father wounds look like in adulthood. A father wound in daughters often tends to reveal itself in a pattern of unhealthy relationships. Daughters with father wounds typically crave the love they didn't get from their father, making them more likely to accept unhealthy behaviors from romantic partners. Relatable. Can relate to that. Furthermore, our caregivers' behaviors often form the basis of our expectations of relationships. Furthermore, our caregivers' behaviors often form the basis of our expectations of relationships. So, if someone was taught to accept being abandoned, abused, or criticized as children, they may be more likely to accept this behavior in a romantic partner. This sounds familiar. Although women with a father wound may, of course, have different sexualities, the following pattern towards men are common. Women who experienced a father wound in childhood may grow up struggling to trust men. That's another one. In contrast, if they developed an avoidant attachment as a result of their father wound, they may avoid intimacy and a close connection with a romantic partner. In contrast, if the father wound caused the daughter to develop an anxious attachment style, they may seek intense closeness and reassurance from men. Relatable content. I used to have such a serious anxious attachment style. If you are not familiar with attachment styles, I highly, highly recommend looking that up. I'm also going to attach a quiz that I found on attachment styles that will also be in the show notes. So if you are interested in that, you can take a look at that and take that quiz. Find out what your attachment style is. But attachment styles are pretty much, how am I going to explain this? Please Google. Okay, don't take my whole word for it. But from the research that I've done in the past, your attachment styles is something that is determined by what was modeled to you as a child, how your parents nurtured or did not nurture you emotionally and mentally and spiritually, pretty much, and that will inform your attachment style. I was anxiously attached person because I had a lot of abandonment issues and I had a lot of just emotional absence from my father's side. So I developed a serious anxious attachment style that also informed why I was a people pleaser and so forth. So yeah, I was somebody that would seek intense closeness and reassurance from avoidant men. So yeah, as I was saying, their sense of self-worth may hinge on this reassurance and validation. And when they don't receive it, they may start to feel anxious, insecure, and lose confidence. And that's exactly what happened to me. Anytime I was in a romantic relationship and the person would pull away, or they would need space, or they would just want to live their own life, I would want to be closer. I would want to, oh my goodness, be stuck to that person like gum. It was just very unhealthy. I would definitely think that the way that they treat me is where my value lies. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah, like it says here, my self-worth was definitely hinging on that person's reassurance and validation. And if they were not reassuring or validating me, I would feel abandoned. I would feel unloved. I would feel like they wouldn't want to be with me anymore. Yeah, it was just unhealthy. So if you don't know what your attachment style is, please take the quiz. Please take the quiz that I've attached. So how are we going to overcome these father wounds? How do we do that, right? I've spoken about what it is. I've spoken about what it has looked like for me. I've also said that therapy really helped me. But what else can you do to overcome the father wound? The first thing is to recognize your father wound. It's really, really good if you are here and if you have reached this point of the episode. That means that you actually want to work through this. If you are somebody that understands that there's something wrong and that you are unhappy with how you have been feeling or how you have been behaving when it comes to certain relationships, romantic, friendship, just even the choices you have been making, then you are already making good progress. So the first step is to recognize that there is an issue. If you're someone with an avoidant attachment style, you maybe would be tempted to fall into patterns of avoidance, denial, or suppression around the pain, loss, and anger surrounding your father wound. It's a very natural response though, because these emotions can be very difficult to feel and manage. I'm someone who didn't have an avoidant attachment style. I was anxious. I wanted a man's approval when he was in my life. I needed him to love me, to want me, to like me. And if he didn't, I would break down and fall apart. So if it was hard for me, because it was definitely hard to deal with this. I can understand that especially when I recognize what was going on or that there was a problem, I can imagine that it's going to be extra challenging for somebody with an avoidant attachment style. So just remember that it's natural for you to feel that way, and that the best thing that you can do for yourself, though, is to try and understand what's going on. Don't give up. Don't suppress. Don't ignore. Furthermore, some families may normalize father wounds, making it seem that the hurt and pain you're experiencing is normal. The inner belief that your experience is like everyone else's can also make a father wound difficult to recognize. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I'm not going to go too far deep into that one, but as somebody who I've had first-hand experience with that, it's not normal. It isn't normal. 100% not. Some things are not normal, and we need to talk about them and get to the bottom of them. So yeah, by recognizing the attachment trauma you experienced as a child and the impact it has on your adult life, you can definitely begin to heal. Absolutely. The second thing is to learn to love yourself. Many people with a father wound feel as if their dad didn't love them, which often motivates them to go searching for that lost love in romantic relationships in adulthood. Unfortunately, that desperation to be loved can mean we accept unhealthy forms of love, which can repeat the patterns of abuse and emotionally unavailability over time. Okay? So yeah, I don't recommend this. This is absolutely not a good idea. Looking to full avoid using somebody else, looking to self-soothe using somebody else, especially when you're in a bad place with yourself, is not going to work. You are going to end up attracting or being attracted to people that are equally as unhealthy as you are, that are equally fighting their own demons, and that's just going to cause so much chaos in your life. So that's not a good idea. The only way that you can fill that void, or that you can soothe or work on closing that gaping hole, that pain, is to start by loving yourself and really dealing with the issues that you have and working through that and acknowledging them and realizing that things are the way that they are. So if you have experienced a father wound, it's really important to offer yourself the love that you want to find in others. You can love yourself in various ways, such as by keeping a gratitude journal where you record the things about life you are grateful each day, treating yourself with kindness and compassion, and adapting how you speak to yourself. For example, instead of thinking I'm such a failure when you get something wrong, reframe this to I can't do this yet, but I can learn. Taking care of your physical health through exercise, adequate sleep, and a healthy diet. The third one is to seek support from a mental health professional. This is something that might work for some people, like myself, and for others it might not work, but there's also other forms of therapy to explore, so I do recommend you do that. The father wound is a deep attachment trauma that can have a profound emotional impact on you, so it can feel difficult to tackle on your own. And while it's possible to heal from that wound on your own, it's often easier with the support of a mental health professional. Mental health professionals such as counselors, psychologists, or psychiatrists can provide a safe, non-judgmental space for you to process your thoughts and feelings relating to your father wound. Absolutely worked for me, and I'm so grateful that I had access to it. I'm also aware that it's a luxury. Not everyone can afford it. So if therapy is something that you want to try but you can't necessarily afford, I think another good place to seek help or get some really solid help. Podcasts have become such a big space, especially podcasts like Diary of a CEO that I've mentioned on the podcast before, where he has professionals on that talk about, he has professionals that deal with specific fields. He has always had psychologists on, and he always does, or psychiatrists, trauma specialists. It's one way to really to get help, to understand what's going on in your mind, to understand what might be influencing your actions. Also buying books like What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, as I mentioned, I read that. just those kinds of things. Because I know one therapy session is very, very expensive. So there are many other ways to get that help. There are so many resources online. So if it's not something that you can afford, or if it doesn't necessarily work for you, then you can explore that. But also, again, there are other forms of therapy to also be explored. If you have never experienced a healthy relationship before, your therapist can also show you what this feels like, enabling you to make healthier decisions in romantic relationships and friendships in the future. The last one is to actively seek or look for a secure and loving partner. I cannot stress this enough. When you are coming into a place of being healthier, you need to actively seek people who are on the same path as you, especially when it comes to romantic love, friendship as well. Do not set yourself back by wanting to go back to being with people for their potential, or being with a person because you believe that you can fix them, or getting into that self-sabotaging cycle where you are with somebody who is emotionally unavailable or avoidant. So it's very important for you to be intentional about choosing a partner who is in alignment with you, who is on the same path as you. You share the same values, you are wanting to grow in the same ways emotionally, mentally, spiritually. That is extremely, extremely important. Yeah, and something else that I absolutely need to say is that one thing that has obviously helped me is my faith, my relationship with God, seeing the Lord as a father figure, as not just the Lord, my God, that I fear because of his greatness, his power, or that I revere because of his generosity. He's not just my counsel, my confidant, but he's also a father, a provider. He loves me, he cares for me, he has shown me what gentle generosity is, what gentle love is, what being stern and being loving can look like. And I am firsthand experiencing that on a daily basis. So seeing God as a father figure to me has also changed things. Seeing God how he sees me has changed things so much. And I gave him my heart, I gave him myself, and he has helped me heal and grow in ways that I wouldn't have imagined. He softened my heart, and I can for sure say that I have gotten to a place of being able to forgive my biological dad, or my earthly father, as others would say, because God, he took me from a place of being extremely angry. He took me from that place and he brought me into salvation and freedom, where I was able to, my heart was softened, and I was able to see my biological dad, my earthly father, as a human first, beyond anything else. Somebody who had his own childhood traumas and experiences, and that informed how he behaved as a father, as an adult. So welcome God into your life as well. I'm never going to get tired of saying that. I will never get tired of recommending that. God does miracles. He will change your life. He will change how you think, how you behave. And he has done that for me in so many ways, more than one. If you haven't listened to the episode that I released before last week, please go back and listen to it. I spoke about how I've been repairing my relationship with men and sex. And I've spoken about how giving myself to God, it played a big part in how my heart changed and how my perspective changed when it came to men and to sex. So, yeah. Yes, I have said all that I wanted to say. I am so grateful that I was able to record this episode. I'm so grateful that I'm in the place that I'm in when it comes to everything, really, but most importantly, this pain that I carried around for years when it came to my father and the father wound that I had, and how it was affecting all the other parts of my life. So yeah, guys, I really hope this episode was helpful. I hope that there was something that you were able to take away from it. Thank you so much for joining me again. This is definitely where we are ending it. I really, really appreciate you. I appreciate your support. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for every time you share the podcast, every time you spread it by word of mouth, send a link to somebody, whatever it is you're doing. Please don't stop. Please don't stop. And also just let anyone know that they can find a cupful on all listening platforms wherever they find their podcasts, and that they can also find it on TikTok. The handle is at acupfulll. You're also more than welcome to DM me on there if you want to share your thoughts, or you can send me an email. All of the information is in the show notes. Have a lovely remainder of this week. Work when you need to, rest when you need to. Be good to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be good to others. Be kind to others. And just take each day as it comes, especially if you are somebody that is trying to deal with whatever pain or trauma that you have endured, that you have suffered. And most importantly, don't forget to keep doing the things that fill your cup.